Places in an hour. Now though, BBC Two marks 25 years of Timewatch with the celebration of a new Elizabethan age.
June the 2nd, 1953, the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II, the greatest spectacle ever staged in Britain. 3 million people lined the streets in London.
Suddenly this great golden coach came into view, and inside sat this beautiful young queen. And this was the woman, as far as I was concerned, that was queen of the world.
For the first time, the 1,000-year-old ceremony was televised live, opening up the most privileged of royal events. 20 million crowded around tiny TV sets to watch their queen being crowned.
She had polished the furniture within an inch of its life because the Queen was coming into her sitting room.
Up and down the country, 17 million people clubbed together to hold coronation parties. In the austerity Britain of 1953, the coronation was designed to be the most sumptuous ever and to mark the birth of a new Elizabethan age. Months of meticulous planning should ensure that in front of a watching world, nothing went wrong.
I've never been so nervous in all my life. On the morning of the coronation, I kept thinking, my gosh, what can go wrong? You know, I knew how many things could go wrong.
Told by the people who watched, shaped, and recorded it, tonight's Timewatch goes backstage to celebrate the people's coronation.
On this, the eve of the coronation, all eyes turn to the royal route.
June the 1st, 1953, and London is preparing to host an enormous parade to celebrate the coronation of 27-year-old Queen Elizabeth II. A coronation committee had spent 12 months planning the most spectacular celebration ever staged. And the whole country was joining in.
There was a real sense that with the new Queen, the new Elizabethan age as they wished to call it, we were re-establishing ourselves as a confident country. We were coming off rationing. We felt that after years of deprivation, we were beginning to be well off again after winning the war.
Queen Elizabeth was to be crowned at an elaborate ceremony in Westminster Abbey. The Abbey had hosted 37 previous coronations, and over the centuries, strict rules were established as to who could attend and in what capacity.
Everything to do with the coronation is based first and foremost on precedent, what happened the last time round and what had happened at previous coronations over the years. This book contains all the names of the people who were summoned or invited, there is a difference, to the coronation. Now the ticket that you want has a gold bar round it and is marked simply A, admit to the Royal Gallery, and it shows the way you arrive and you go through the annex straight up the aisle and take your place. The ticket that perhaps you would want rather less is Z3, admit to the North Triforium, and that way you would arrive Old Palace Yard, and then you'd go in through door number 10 and then find your way in as best you can.
Among the first to be sent invitations were 6 specially chosen maids of honour. One of them was 20-year-old Lady Jane Vane Tempest Stewart.
To my absolute amazement, it said, would you like to take part in the coronation? Would you like to be one of the Queen's train bearers? You know, my first reaction to that was, would I like? Who is likely to say no to that?
Quite extraordinary. I mean, we were like the sort of Spice Girls of the early 50s, because in those days there were no girl bands like that. And we were photographed the whole time, and there were articles about us, and people were very interested to know what we were like, I think.
As the great day approached, the streets were festooned along a royal processional route that measured 6 miles, 1,525 yards. Everything had been planned with meticulous care. The route stretched from Buckingham Palace along the Mall to Parliament Square and Westminster Abbey, where the ceremony would take place. A longer route would be taken from the Abbey back through London to the Palace, so that the newly crowned Queen could be seen by as many people as possible. Specially built grandstands were erected with 27 miles of seating for 100,000 people who could afford the £4 for the open stands and £6 under cover. The army was volunteered for special coronation duty to ensure all the spectators would be kept safe. Nothing was left to chance. But there was one thing the Coronation Committee hadn't planned for. A knock on the door from BBC television producer Peter Dimmock. He was asking for permission to televise the coronation live for the first time in history.
Well, of course, the establishment, being what it was in those days, were very much against it. They made all sorts of excuses. They said that Churchill was against it, and I think he was. But I think mainly it was an era of privilege, you know, them and us sort of situation. And they felt that if they were going to sit there and watch it, then they should retain that privilege and that other people shouldn't see it, which clearly was ridiculous because society was moving on.
But in 1953, the establishment still had strict rules preventing cameras from getting too close to the Queen.
Eventually, we got permission to have a trial in the Abbey with one camera. And I put in a 2-inch lens, which was the widest lens you could possibly use. So it made, and we had a girl walk where the Queen would walk, and she looked miles away. So they all muttered amongst themselves, and they said, well, perhaps it's not quite as bad as we thought. We'll go away and think about it again.
But in fact, the Coronation Committee had other fears about showing the ceremony live on television.
At previous coronations, things had gone very, very badly wrong. I mean, for example, at George VI's coronation, I mean, you can actually see the Dean of Westminster and the Archbishop sort of looking at the crown and wondering which way it is. And the King writes about it in his diary. He still didn't know at the end of the day whether the crown had been put on back to front or not.
To avoid similar embarrassment, the 1953 Coronation Committee insisted that everyone attend Westminster Abbey for painstaking rehearsals.
We had an awful lot of them, I know that. And mostly they were rather boring because they were very repetitious all the time. The Archbishop was a very bossy little man. He said, I don't think you're doing this step quite right. You've got to walk up these stairs, 3 steps it was. And he said, I'll show you how to do it. And as he came down again, he rolled over, he fell, and his cassock flew over his head, and we all burst out laughing, which rather offended his dignity.
The Abbey rehearsals under the harsh TV lighting also exposed a threat to the Queen's dignity.
She went to the Abbey in the very red robes of state and was crowned in the very purple coronation robes. And the Queen couldn't pop off every 5 minutes and put on new makeup, so you had to get a lipstick which wasn't going to make her look like Cruella de Vil.
The person charged with solving the problem was the Queen's makeup artist, Thelma Holland. But the details were highly confidential.
My mother used to say that she felt like a secret agent who'd been entrusted with some frightfully confidential information, and she thought what would happen to her if for some terrible reason she was run over on the way home and they looked through her handbag to find out who she was and found the coronation robe samples. I mean, she said she was very pleased when she finally got home and had my father put them in the safe.
Hounded by journalists, the palace eventually agreed to Thelma giving a press release with details of how she would make up the Queen's face on Coronation Day. The crowning of the new Queen had captured everyone's imagination. Every available newsreel camera was sent to London to film the final preparations and rehearsals.
On Friday, the final rehearsal of the coronation ceremony was held in Westminster Abbey. All around the Abbey Annex, thousands of sightseers gathered for a glimpse of the brilliant robes and bright uniforms that will crowd into the Abbey tomorrow.
But there was one thing beyond everyone's control: the Great British Weather.
The official weather forecast for the London area tomorrow. There will be showers which will be heavy at times with hail and thunder, and the temperature will drop to between 39 and 43 degrees.
The hundreds of thousands of people who had camped on the streets overnight were in for a shock. Coronation Day would be one of the worst June days on record.
It got a bit cold and chilly early hours of the morning. My father suddenly remembered he'd taken a hip flask of brandy, so that was a novelty in itself for a 15-year-old to have a swig of that. But it felt better afterwards.
We didn't take any sleeping bags. A lot of people did, but we just had Macs on, and so we all grabbed these pieces of cardboard and got our little pitch where we were going to tuck down for the night.
I think we probably sat more than laid.
Oh, I think we slept all right. Well, I slept all right.
Well,
I could sleep anywhere. But,
The coronation of 1953 also united Britain in celebration with its overseas Commonwealth. Prime ministers arrived from Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the other countries and territories. Political leaders from Vietnam and the Middle East. Queen Salote sailed from the tiny South Pacific island of Tonga. 2,500 servicemen from across the world came to take their place in the great event. The Mounties even brought their own transport.
The soldiers of many nations have many different tastes in food. Here, for instance, Pakistani cooks are preparing chapatis in their own temporary kitchen.
On Coronation Day, there was, of course, a large Commonwealth contingent. The map of the world still had a lot of red on it in those days, and Britain was still a power in the world. And they did indeed come from all over the place, from little places like Fiji, bigger places like Canada, and all of them were represented on the parade. And you really felt that you were part of something that was international, and there was a kind of togetherness, which I don't think we've experienced since.
In total, 29,200 men and women were assembled to take part in the coronation procession. But as much of London had been destroyed during the Blitz, living quarters were still at a premium.
We thought we were going to be billeted in some exotic place, you know, like a hotel or something like that. We were, in fact, all piled onto lorries with our instruments and carted off to Kensington Gardens. And here we had this city of tents, enormous city of tents, and several thousand servicemen, all under canvas. And we had straw mattresses and straw pillows, which were full of earwigs in the morning.
I know it was about 4 o'clock in the morning. They got us all up and said, come on, you've got to get up now and stand now, because there's so many people coming in and we've got to get everybody in.
We all got to our control room at about 5 in the morning, and we had to sort of check and double-check everything. I've never been so nervous in all my life, even when I was a pilot all through the war. I was fairly hairy moments, but on the morning of the coronation, I kept thinking, my gosh, what can go wrong? You know, I knew how many things could go wrong.
As far as I remember, I slept quite well, but I woke up feeling very agitated. I did feel nervous then.
At Buckingham Palace, the coronation royal standard was raised. A young Prince Charles was among the early risers. Inside the palace, the Queen was now up and getting ready for her great day. At 7:15, her makeup artist arrived.
I don't know that my mother asked. I suspect it was graciously offered as a treat that I would be allowed to go to Buckingham Palace with her on the morning and be there for the day. I do remember being very high up in Buckingham Palace and looking out through a small window at hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people.
For those who had camped out overnight, Coronation Day did not get off to a good start.
every time it started to rain, everybody got up. So instead of being like the cows, keeping their patch dry, everything got wet again.
Along the procession route, the plans which had been so meticulously laid now swung into action. 8,000 extra policemen had been drafted in from all over the country.
Because we were lucky, we were right on the curbside. We had a lovely policeman in front of us. He came from Brighton.
Along Victoria Embankment, space had been reserved for 30,000 school children.
We were well behaved. I think children in those days were well behaved. We perhaps teased the sailor that was standing in front of us, but that really was how we amused ourselves.
Refreshment tents were set up along the route and in the royal parks. 30,000 catering staff were brought in to feed the enormous crowds. People with tickets for grandstands in the Mall and Whitehall had to be in their places by 6 a.m. At Westminster Abbey, the strict timetable had assigned the dignitaries attending the coronation with a particular seat and a specific arrival time. No one was exempt. Once inside, some of the most privileged people in the land would have to wait for 4 hours for the ceremony to begin.
They had to sit there from really early in the morning, and it was incredible how you kept seeing the coronets taken off and things like sandwiches brought out and flasks of brandy. I think it was quite an endurance test for them, and of course they didn't see nearly as much as one saw on live television in the end.
Westminster Abbey normally holds 2,000 people. For the coronation of 1953, just over 8,000 had to be squeezed in. Extra seating was constructed in every available nook and cranny. William Wallace was a 12-year-old chorister at the coronation. He has spent a lifetime singing in the Abbey.
It was completely transformed for the coronation. This was built up as a platform, and in each transept and behind there and all the way along there were additional balconies, 2 tiers of balconies in the transepts here. The peers who had to make homage to the Queen in the forefront and their wives on the other side. In the stalls here, Commonwealth Prime Ministers and other leading dignitaries, and we were up in the balconies just this side of the organ, and I can't remember who on earth was in some of these other balconies, and up in the triforium up there were yet more boxes for people who probably couldn't see very much at all, but heard what was going on and had the sense that they were sharing in the ceremony.
They were very worried at the 1953 coronation about the allocation of the seats because more and more people wanted to come. I think it was very particularly a question at one point as to whether or not they could invite the members of the House of Commons without inviting their wives, but it was said that there would be such domestic strife at home, this would sort of cause unparalleled storms of rage, that they had to sort of give up that idea.
Space also had to be found inside the Abbey for 5 medical centres, army signal units, emergency radio links, broadcast control rooms, commentary boxes, newsreel, and BBC camera crews.
One of my key camera positions in the Abbey, was going to be in the middle of the choir screen overlooking the nave. But that's where they were trying to put the orchestra, which was 93 strong. But the Ministry of Works chap, Bertel, said to me, the ceiling is low enough for us to rip up the floorboards and build you a hole for the cameraman to sit in. Well, it worked wonderfully because we had a small cameraman, Bob Flanagan, lovely, lovely chap, and he was only just over 5 feet. So it was marvellous. He just looked like another musician.
Outside the Abbey, a huge annex was specially built. This included a private area for the Queen and would house the priceless coronation regalia. The man responsible for protecting the Queen's crown jewels was Captain Philip Duncombe of the Grenadier Guards.
We paraded in Wellington Barracks at 7:30. I commanded a party of a company sergeant major and 53 guardsmen, and we lined the walls of the annex. We mounted sentries on the regalia, we mounted sentries on the outside of the west door. We marched down to the Abbey and entered the annex at 8:15, and we were there until just after 3 o'clock.
The commanding officer of the Sovereign's escort was more fortunate. Not only would he get to ride next to the Queen, he also got a lie-in.
The Household Cavalry were very lucky because they were the last people to go on parade. All the other poor devils had been parading the streets from the early hours of the morning, and we only had to just turn up at Buckingham Palace and then drive off. So we had the best of both worlds.
At Buckingham Palace, everyone was now in position and waiting for the first glimpse of the Queen's carriage.
It can only be a few moments now before Her Majesty appears. And at any moment now, that empty archway there will frame that most noble and stirring of sights, the Sovereign's escort of the Household Cavalry. 2 divisions of the Life Guards preceding the team of greys that draws the great coach of state.
The whole palace was buzzing around with people because they were all getting into position. And then the Queen came down. I just saw her in profile and she looked rather serious but beautiful and very calm. And then she got into the coach.
I was on my horse, level with the coach, and was able to talk to the Queen. And she said, "What are we waiting for?" And I replied, "Ma'am, waiting for the man on the roof to drop the baton." Then suddenly the baton dropped. I gave the order, Sovereign's escort, walk march.
The walls are very, very thick of the palace. You can just hear a hum. But as we went through the archway to go out into the forecourt, it was just a tremendous roar. Thousands and thousands of people just roaring.
And here comes the Sovereign's escort of the Household Cavalry. And behind, riding in the gold coach of state, her husband at her side, comes Her Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II. By the grace of God, Queen of this realm and of her other realms and territories, head of the Commonwealth, defender of the faith.
It was just unlike anything I'd ever seen before. London, yes, is always a busy city, but to see these people lining the route 6 deep, I mean, it just looked like millions of people.
As we were standing there, an enormous cheer went up through the crowd, and we thought, oh, it's happening, the parade is happening. So we all moved forward, and it in fact was the road sweepers coming along and sweeping up the horse droppings prior to the big parade actually starting.
I was on the left-hand side, on the rear wheel. Being the junior footman, I got on the Duke's side rather than the Queen's side. I was very privileged to be there. I was only 22, so I was very, very privileged to be there. Well, you wore a white shirt with a ruffle, pink stockings with garters, breeches, and quite a heavy gold braid coat. And I think I weighed my livery, and it was 26 pounds before I went out in it.
Newsreel cameras filmed the coronation in colour, and edited highlights were screened in cinemas for months afterwards.
Her Majesty goes to dedicate herself to her peoples.
In comparison, the grainy black and white BBC images were poor, but they were transmitted live, and for the first time, people up and down the country were able to watch the events in London from their own homes.
We lived in a very small village at the foot of the Lake District, and we were the very first family in the village to get a television. In those days, travelling on a bus to, say, Morecambe, which is 20 miles away, was a once-a-year occurrence, so a trip to London would be unheard of.
We all went round early in the morning to this lady who was not really an auntie. She had polished the furniture within an inch of its life because the Queen was coming into her sitting room, and she'd bought these beautiful lilies which stank to high heaven. They were absolutely overpowering. You know, with a small room, furniture polish, lilies, and 20 people, it was quite a heady mix. And tears, and yes, it was a very emotional day.
And at last the coach, for which all eyes have been waiting and all cheers.
There were 19 of us in the living room watching the coronation. Somebody quipped that we'd have made a fortune selling ice creams in the interval.
For the first time, there were more television viewers than radio listeners. And, you know, every television set had dozens and dozens of people around it. Those little tiny 9-inch pie television screen. But sometimes there were 40 or 50 people. And the people at the back, I'm sure, could hardly see anything at all.
The person with the best view was Commanding Officer of the Royal Horse Guards, Colonel David Smiley.
And along the embankment as far as Parliament Square are thousands and thousands of school children, and they absolutely yell their heads off, waving flags. It was very impressive.
Suddenly this great golden coach came into view. It was glittering, and inside just sat this beautiful young queen. She was shining as much as the coach was shining. This was the woman, as far as I was concerned, that was queen of the world. She was queen of what in those days was the empire. Today we would call it the Commonwealth. But to me, that was the world. And this woman was going to go to the Abbey and have a crown put on her head which said, "You rule the world."
At precisely 11 o'clock, right on schedule, the Queen's carriage arrived at Westminster Abbey. Many of those inside the Abbey had now been in position for 4 hours.
Just outside our control room, the Ministry of Works had built a set of loos, which were marked peers and peeresses. It's the only time I went into a peer's loo. I thought, well, at least they could treat me to that in the morning. And to my utter astonishment, there was blue velvet, dark blue velvet, on the El Sands lavatory seat. That gives you an indication of what life was like in those days.
The Abbey Choir was lucky because we came in one of the early processions, but I think we came in by about 9, and we must have been there for much of the rest of the day. We had sandwiches, we had barley sugars, there were toilets underneath the balconies, which, like all little boys, we had to go to from time to time, and the tension built up as we waited for the great and the good to come in after us, and then, of course, the final ceremony.
Then we stood there waiting, and then the Queen turned around and said, "Come on, girls."
Walking into the Abbey was extraordinary. Partly, I think, the colour and the singing. It was like a medieval tapestry. It was just so exciting. And to be part of this, because we were just behind the Queen helping her, one felt that, you know, one was in the middle of it all.
As the coronation ceremony got underway, it was estimated that in Britain alone, 20 million people were watching it live on television.
I felt part of the ceremony, really. I was wishing I was one of those ladies holding the train of the Queen.
We had a relatively easy job because all we were doing was just following each other, following the Queen, holding onto the train for dear life, which incidentally was very heavy. My family made me nervous. They kept saying, "Are you sure you're up to doing this?" Or, "I hope you don't make a mistake. I hope you don't fall down." You know, the kind of thing siblings say to each other.
Everything that happens at a service, like a coronation, happens for a reason. And it's all part of the affirmation and the acceptance of the new sovereign. When the Queen goes to the Abbey, she signs the coronation oath, which is a promise to serve as Queen. And then, of course, there's that wonderful moment where they take the new sovereign and they show her to every side of the Abbey. And this is really to represent the fact that they're showing this is the person who is your new king or queen. Also have to make sure it isn't an imposter.
I here present unto you Queen Elizabeth, your undoubted queen.
And they have to acknowledge her, and they say, yes, okay, now they officially recognize her, and they see that that's the right person.
Are you willing to do the same?
The coronation ceremony has not changed much over the centuries.
The things which I have herewithal promised, I will perform and keep, so help me God.
Many of the words and actions derive from those used in 973, at the coronation of Edgar, the first king of all England.
Her Majesty now signs the parchment copy of the oath, this being her only written contract with her people.
We weren't allowed to talk, and we were supposed to be very respectful. And we were all wearing our Sunday best clothes because we were watching the Queen.
And the Queen now returns to her chair, and there comes the presentation to her of the Bible upon which she took her oath.
We were all terrified of fainting, and for that reason we had these long, long white gloves, and inside there you put this little phial of smelling salts, and if you felt faint, you just gave a quick sniff like that. It was meant to revive you.
And in fact, I felt extremely faint, and I thought, gosh, I cannot faint. And at one point, I couldn't see anything. Everything went so black. And Black Rod, who was this wonderful gentleman who was standing on my left, realised something, I wasn't feeling very well, and pinioned hit me to the pillar at the back, and really saved the day.
The Queen is now ready to receive the regalia, the emblems of majesty.
King Edward's chair, in which the new Queen would be crowned, had been used at every coronation since 1308. At the centre of the most sumptuous coronation ever held was a very old and battered piece of history.
It is an extraordinary chair. It was built by Edward I to celebrate his victory over the Scots and his capture of the Stone of Scone, on which Scottish kings had traditionally been crowned. In the 18th century, Westminster schoolboys, for a dare, would be locked in the Abbey overnight and sleep in the chair and then carve their initials in the back. It's very battered. It must have been, when originally built, gilt, beautifully decorated. Much of that has fallen off over the ages. So what you see today is a chair which has been half restored, very badly damaged over the centuries, but has still survived.
Receive the bracelet of sincerity and wisdom.
I can remember my mum and the other ladies going on about how young she was, and it was too much for a young girl.
And as symbols and pledges of the bond that unites you with your peoples.
Most of them were in tears at one time or another, dabbing their eyes. I seem to recall them being very maternal towards the Queen. You know, it brought out all their maternal instincts that such a young girl should be taking on such responsibility.
Well, we saw nothing of the coronation at all. All we knew that it was starting at 11 o'clock. Was it 11?
I think it was about that, yeah.
Or was she crowned at 11? I can't remember.
No.
But I know that when she was crowned, I think the guns went and somebody saw she's crowned, and there was a terrific cheer went up then. Then we knew it wouldn't be too long before we would see them. So it was well worth it.
I kept thinking how lucky I was. I was counting my blessings and thinking that this is such a special day, never to be forgotten.
The televising of the 1953 coronation invited the British people to join the ceremony for the first time in 1,000 years, and to see their Queen as they had never been allowed to before.
There was absolutely no question of doubt that televising the coronation, particularly, of course, the service, was the birth of real television in this country. It brought the people, the country, and the royal family absolutely together. Everyone enjoyed it, was very proud of it, and we got the most wonderful, wonderful close-up of the Queen that there'd ever really been on television up until that point.
Queen looked so beautiful. She had the most wonderful complexion and amazing eyes, this tiny waist, and the dress was all embroidered and shone and sparkled. I mean, she really looked like a fairy tale queen.
But the fairy tale Queen had a secret she shared only with her makeup artist, who kept it for 50 years.
The secret my mother kept all this time was that, in fact, she didn't make the Queen's face up for the coronation at all. She advised on it and chose the colours. And despite all the press hounding, the Queen, on the morning of the coronation, put her own face on.
At the end of the 3-hour ceremony, the Queen retired to the annex for a private lunch of smoked salmon, foie gras, cheese and biscuits. A special coronation lunch for 350 of the Queen's most important guests was laid on next door in the Great Hall of Westminster School. Like much of London, it was still a bomb site. The job of transforming the hall and providing the lunch was given to domestic guru Constance Spry and her team.
Well, it was done on a shoestring, really. The sheeting on the buffet tables was plastic that had been painted. The buffet vases were made from old meat dish covers, which she found in junk shops. It wasn't done with vast sums of money. Mrs. Spry chose chicken for the luncheon menu because there were problems with many of the people with different religions not eating certain foods like pork or beef or lamb, and chicken was the main thing which the vast majority of people would eat at that time.
Britain's leading domestic experts created a special dish for the dignitaries of chicken, curry powder, mayonnaise and apricot jam. It was served cold.
And then people took the recipe away and it became known universally as Coronation chicken.
After lunch, the most spectacular coronation procession the country had ever staged got underway. And so did the rain.
Raining, as you can see again on the crowd, but no umbrellas up allowed here, just newspapers on the head.
The weather on Coronation Day was almost predictable. You know, I mean, people say in England, if it's going to be something special, it's likely to rain, and it does.
The parade wound its way along a 5-mile route back to the palace. By now, there were 3 million people lining the streets, waiting to see the new Queen. 129 nations and territories were represented at the coronation of 1953. From front to back, the parade stretched for 2 miles. It took 45 minutes to pass by. Tradition dictated that the most important guests had to be carried in horse-drawn carriages, but these were still at a premium after the war. 7 extra coaches had to be borrowed from Sir Alexander Corder's film studios.
A coach came along. The public address announced that this was Queen Salote of Tonga. To us, that meant nothing. And because it had been a rainy day, all of the carriages going along had actually had their hoods up. And suddenly this carriage appeared, the hood was down, and there was this large black lady sitting there, dressed in white, with this wonderful, wonderful sunny smile. And to this day, I will swear to you that the sun came out as she came past, because she just brightened the whole day.
The people at the back, of course, a lot of them had periscopes, didn't they?
Yes.
I don't think I'd ever seen those before in a crowd. You know, they're sort of a lens at the bottom and another one at the top.
So you're looking in here, but you're seeing something that's over there. Marvellous thing, yes, marvellous.
Television and press coverage of the day was unprecedented. 2,000 journalists and 500 photographers from 92 countries reported the events from along the procession route. The BBC broadcast live commentary in 41 different languages. British servicemen and their families watched the events live in Berlin. Soldiers fighting in the Korean War stopped to tune into coverage of the events back home and to mark the occasion.
Has been written and sung here today, in this worn and beautiful old building.
Commonwealth countries across the world held their own parades for the crowning of their queen.
The coronation was a very confident statement of a mixture of the new Elizabethan age and of Britain still as a great and global power. And the Commonwealth dimension of all of this was very important. But the overwhelming sense was of an English coronation at the center of a great empire.
The BBC footage of the ceremony was loaded into helicopters at Alexandra Palace and rushed to London Airport. From there, RAF planes flew them across the Atlantic. In Canada and the United States, a total of 87 million viewers watched their own version of the coronation program the same day.
Wrapped in the cloak of gold with the golden girdle, the Queen takes the jeweled sword, the sword of justice and mercy, and offers it at the altar.
And all over Britain, people held their own coronation celebrations.
Well, we'd spent weeks decorating the street and having the stage built, and every house was decorated. And when we saw the rain coming down and all the paint was running on our beautiful stage and our banners, it was just heartbreaking, really. But we were still going to have our tea, we were still going to have our coronation party. So off we went down to the school hall and enjoyed it there.
I've never played the national anthem and the RAF March Past so many times in my life. Some of these people had been there 24 hours, 30 hours, 36 hours. They'd been there forever, all to see the Queen go by, because she was only going by. She wasn't stopping and saying hi. She was just going by. And our job was to entertain them, and also, of course, to play the appropriate national anthems as various people went by. So on that day, I suppose we played the national anthem of the RAF March Past about 50 times, something like that.
We got to one place where the band struck up God Save the Queen about a minute early, and by the time we nearly got there, they'd stopped. And General Julian yelled out on the top of his voice, "Play that bloody thing again." And I always wondered in my later life whether the Queen actually heard what he said.
Finally, after 20 hours of waiting, the big moment arrived for Tony and Jean Langley.
I was right on the curbside, And as the coach came across to us, she was so near the curb. If the window had been open, I could have put my hand in. We were so close to her.
We were all cheering. I think we were all just ecstatic. We'd been not long out of the war, it'd been drab and grey, and then all of a sudden this magnificent, colourful occasion was in front of us. So we were cheering for that as well as for our new Queen.
We were all so relieved because nothing had gone wrong. And the Queen, we were all running along the corridor, and Prince Charles and Princess Anne were darting about, and Prince Charles actually got hold of the Queen's crown, which he's staggering about with. We were terrified he's going to drop it.
He got about as high as that with it and couldn't get any further because it's so heavy. I was in an absolute panic because I was nearby. I thought I was going to drop it and all those lovely things will fall out.
And now here is the Queen.
We all went out on the balcony, and I've never seen so many people. They were just there, you could hardly put a pin between them. And the sort of feeling of love and excitement, they were all shouting for her, and God save the Queen, and, you know, I could just feel the affection for her.
As the RAF flyby passed overhead, the great day was almost over.
As this day draws to its close, I know that my abiding memory of it will be not only the solemnity and beauty of the ceremony, but the inspiration of your loyalty and affection. I thank you all from a full heart.
And then it was all over, leaving the people who took part with lifelong memories.
The coronation was unique. That's the only word for it. It was unique. It will never, ever be replicated.
It is almost difficult to imagine what a coronation today might be like. I think there would still be the pomp, there'd still be the circumstance, and of course it would be a very important occasion, but I doubt very much whether it could be anything quite like the one that happened in 1953.
Share your memories of the coronation of 1953 and tell us how you think the next coronation will be different. Log on now at bbc.co.uk/Timewatch.